picture of me in that office anymore. That night, I showed Daniel the photos. He read them twice, then once more. "What is this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He sat at our kitchen table for a long time before answering. "It looks like some asset or account structure ties back to you. And it looks like he planned to pressure you into waiving something after the wedding." My pulse was hammering. "Why after the wedding?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because once the event passed, they probably thought you'd be emotionally exhausted. Easier to corner, easier to guilt, easier to make sign." I sank into the chair across from him and said, "My own father." Daniel reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Take a breath. I thought this was about the guest list. It may have started as leverage," he said carefully, "or as a loyalty test, but this memo means there's something bigger under it." I wanted to believe there had to be an innocent explanation. Some misunderstood legal wording, some accounting detail I was overreacting to because my family had me primed to mistrust myself. That old reflex kicked in immediately. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe family pressure maintained was a phrase taken out of context. Maybe my father didn't write it the way it sounded in my head. Maybe. That's what gaslighting does to you. Even when the words are in front of your face, you still start negotiating with your own instincts. Daniel did not let me spiral alone. "Send the photos to yourself, to me, and to Naomi," he said. "Back them up." "Naomi?" "Yes. Someone outside this family who won't fold under pressure." So I did. I emailed the images to a new folder with a bland subject line. I sent copies to Daniel and Naomi. Then I printed them at the 24-hour copy shop near our apartment and slid the pages into a plain manila folder, which I put in the back of my desk drawer under old tax returns and warranty documents. I still didn't understand the full shape of what I was holding, but I understood enough to know it should not disappear. The next week felt strange, like the air had changed pressure before a storm. My father grew almost cheerful in our texts. Patricia sent me a message saying she hoped we could move toward healing before the big day. My mother called twice to tell me everyone was willing to put things behind us if I stopped being stubborn. Nolan texted, "Dad is trying here. Don't humiliate him." That line made me sit very still. Don't humiliate him. Nobody had used the word humiliate when they cornered me at brunch. Nobody had used it when my aunts performed disappointment like a synchronized choir. Nobody had used it when my father implied consequences for a wedding guest list. But suddenly, before anything had even happened, I was being warned not to humiliate him. I showed Daniel the message. He read it once and said, "They're anticipating a confrontation." "Do you think he knows I saw the memo?" "I think he knows something is unstable," Daniel said. "Not necessarily what." I stopped sleeping properly after that. Not because I was afraid of my wedding. I was afraid of the part after. Afraid that I was standing in the mouth of some family machine that had been moving for years without my knowledge. Every time my phone lit up with one of their names, I felt my stomach drop. I started keeping notes. Dates. Comments. Who said what? Where? Daniel suggested it gently, and once I started, I couldn't stop. The pattern was too clear. Pressure from multiple sides, repeated accusations, emotional framing, sudden mentions of loyalty, family image, disgrace, gratitude, respect. It all circled the same core message. Cooperate or be cast out. The day before my wedding, my mother called me 7 times before noon. I ignored the first 5 because I was at the venue with Julia checking table placements and confirming the florist had corrected the centerpieces. When I finally answered, I stepped into the hallway near the service entrance where the smell of greenery and coffee lingered in the air. "Mum, I'm busy." Her voice was already tight. "Your father is deeply hurt." I closed my eyes. "We are not doing this today." You're forcing his hand. My body went still. What does that mean? It means he's tired of being disrespected. I leaned against the wall. By whom? By you, Lauren. By your constant insistence on excluding his family. I could hear staff moving trays somewhere down the hall. A door swung open and shut. My own pulse sounded louder than the conversation. I am not discussing the guest list the day before my wedding. Then maybe you should think about what matters more, she said. One stubborn choice, or your relationship with your father. I laughed once because I didn't know what else to do. That relationship should not depend on 4 seats. But she said very coldly, "It depends on respect." Then she hung up. I stood there with my phone in my hand, feeling like I had stepped off a stair in the dark. Daniel found me 10 minutes later and asked what happened. I told him, and he went quiet in the way he always did when he was angrier than he wanted to show in public. "This is not about children," he said again. "No," I whispered. "I know." That evening, while I was at Naomi's apartment with my bridesmaids, getting my overnight things together and trying to pretend that the next day would be normal, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. I knew before I opened it that something had ended. The message was longer than anything he had sent me in months. It began with disappointment and ended with punishment wrapped in the language of dignity and moral duty. He wrote that my refusal to include Patricia's children had revealed my character beyond doubt. He wrote that he would not attend a wedding that publicly insulted his household. He wrote that a daughter who intentionally rejects her father's family should no longer expect the privileges of being treated like one. Then came the sentence that split my life in 2. "Do not call me your father anymore." I sat on the edge of Naomi's guest bed and read it 3 times. The room blurred. My throat closed up. Somewhere in the apartment, one of my bridesmaids was laughing in the kitchen at something Julia had said, and the sound felt like it belonged to another planet. Naomi came in first because she knew my face well enough to read disaster before words. "Lauren." I handed her the phone. Her eyes moved quickly down the screen, and then she said a curse under her breath. I had never heard her use before. "Are you kidding me?" Julia came in behind her. "What happened?" Naomi passed her the phone. I couldn't speak for a second. My chest hurt too much. "Finally," I said. "He disowned me by text. The night before my wedding." Julia's mouth fell open. "What?" I nodded once. "My mother knew. She called earlier." Naomi sat beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders while I stared at the floorboards. My first feeling was pain. My second was humiliation. But underneath, both was something harder and stranger, a pattern clicking into place. I opened my messages, gave Julia a small smile. "I wasn't speaking to you." The table went still. I looked at Patricia. "Please don't do this here." She pressed her lips together, and in a different family, that could have been the end of it. In mine, it was the signal for escalation. My mother set down her cup. "Do what?" "Express hurt." "Why is everyone allowed feelings except your parents?" "They're not my children," I said, trying hard to keep my voice level. "And this brunch isn't the place." Aunt Sylvia shook her head. That's such a cold way to say it. Patricia's eyes glistened with practiced restraint. I never asked Lauren to love them like her own. I only hoped she'd have enough grace not to make their place in this family feel conditional. I could feel heat rising into my face. Around us, other tables kept chatting, silverware clinked softly, and it struck me how much damage can be done in public when everyone keeps their voices low enough to avoid causing a scene. Julia leaned toward me. "Lauren, you don't have to respond." But I did respond because I was tired of being narrated over. "I am not making anyone's place conditional," I said. "I am setting a wedding guest list. That's all." My mother laughed once, thin and sharp. "See? This is what she does. She reduces everything until she sounds innocent." Naomi put down her fork. "Rebecca, that's not fair." My mother turned to her with icy politeness. "I'm sorry, who are you relation to our family?" Naomi smiled back, but it was the kind of smile that says you picked the wrong woman to condescend to. "I'm the person paying attention." Daniel's sister looked at me, and I saw the exact moment she realized how deep this went. Patricia dabbed at the corner of one eye with her napkin. "I told Thomas we shouldn't say anything. I said Lauren already resents us enough." That did it. My chest felt tight. My hands started shaking under the table because that was the trick, always. They wounded first and then performed injury when I reacted. "I do not resent your children," I said. "I resent being bullied over a decision that should have stayed between me and my fiancé." The word bullied hit the table hard. Aunt Irene inhaled like I had cursed. My mother's face hardened. Aunt Sylvia muttered, "Unbelievable." Patricia went silent and wounded-looking. All three women suddenly had the same expression people use when they want to imply they are dealing with someone unstable. Naomi touched my elbow. "Let's step outside." I nodded, but not fast enough. My mother stood and said in a voice low with anger, "Do you know how selfish you sound? Your father has bent over backward to support you." I looked up at her. "Support me how?" She blinked, caught for half a second. That half second mattered. Then she recovered and said, "Emotionally, Lauren, don't be vulgar." Vulgar? For asking a clear question. That brunch ended early. Daniel met me outside because Naomi had called him. I stood on the sidewalk holding my little gift bag from Julia with my mascara running and my appetite gone, feeling embarrassed in a way that made me want to peel off my own skin. Daniel wrapped his coat around my shoulders, though it wasn't cold, and Julia was furious on my behalf in that controlled, practical way. Some people are when they're already making lists in their heads. On the drive home, Daniel said, "This is coordinated." I turned to him. "What?" "This." He kept his eyes on the road. The pressure, the witnesses, the repeated language, the setup. They're not speaking emotionally. They're building a case. I stared at the passing traffic. A case for what? He was quiet for a second. "For making it look like you're the one rejecting the family." That thought made my skin go cold. A few days later, I found the first piece of evidence, though I didn't know yet how important it would become. My father had asked me to stop by his office downtown to pick up an old photo album he claimed belonged to my late grandmother and thought I might want for the wedding memory table. He worked as a financial planner and had always taken pride in his office. The place smelled like leather folders, dark coffee, and expensive printer toner. The lobby had clean glass walls and abstract paintings in colors that looked chosen to reassure wealthy, nervous clients. His assistant told me he had stepped out for 10 minutes, but that I could wait in his office because he said you'd know where the album is. That should have made me suspicious. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and noticed a stack of folders slightly askew beside his laptop. One thin envelope had my full legal name typed across the front. Lauren Elizabeth Bennett. My stomach dropped. At first, I told myself not to touch it. Then I told myself I was probably listed as a beneficiary on some old account, or maybe it was a copy of an invitation contract if he had offered to review something. I reached for it before I could overthink myself out of the moment. Inside was a draft memo on company letterhead. I still remember the exact sensation of reading the first lines and feeling my hearing go strange. It referred to a proposed family trust restructuring connected to a retirement property purchase in Arizona. It referenced intergenerational transfer alignment, signature dependencies, and a line that made my mouth go dry. Contingent on cooperation from adult daughter Lauren Bennett, whose interest must be formally waived to avoid future dispute. Waived. I read it again. There was no photo album in that envelope. No sentimental keepsake. Just paperwork in polished language, suggesting that some part of my father's long-term retirement plan involved obtaining my signature so I could step aside from an interest I had not even known existed. At the bottom was a note clipped to the memo in my father's handwriting. Need this finalized by Q3. All easier to handle after wedding if family pressure maintained. My entire body went cold. Family pressure maintained. I heard movement in the hallway and shoved the papers back into the envelope so fast I nearly tore it. But before I put it down, I used my phone to take quick photographs of every page. My hands were trembling so badly one image blurred, so I took it again. Then I slid the envelope back, exactly where I had found it, and sat down just as my father stepped in with 2 coffees and a smile that would have convinced anyone else he was pleased to see his daughter. "Sorry, traffic near the courthouse," he said. "You okay?" I looked at him, and for one dangerous second, I thought he might somehow see the pictures burning in my phone. But his expression stayed easy. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." He handed me the coffee and opened a cabinet behind his desk. "Here's the album. Thought you might like some family history on display at the wedding." Family history. The phrase made me want to laugh. I took the album and said nothing. I remember noticing then for the first time a framed photo on the credenza behind him. It was him, Patricia, and her 4 children at a lake house, all smiling in matching blue shirts. There wasn't a single, tasteful people. The kind of table that made it harder to point to what was wrong. Nolan was there with his wife, Andrea. My mother had arrived too, which should have warned me that this was not really about logistics. My 3 aunts from my mother's side, Aunt Sylvia and Irene and Aunt Martha, came in 20 minutes later with desserts, false cheer, and the exact energy of women who were delighted to be early for a performance. I sat down slowly, already uneasy. Patricia smiled at me from across the table. "Lauren, sweetheart, before we talk about seating, I just want to say I know planning a wedding can make people a little stressed." That sentence sounds harmless, but if you've lived around manipulation long enough, you learn to hear the oil in it. I gave a polite smile. "Sure, it's a lot, but we've got it mostly under control." My father took a sip of wine and said, "Then this should be easy." I remember how cold the fork felt in my fingers. Patricia leaned forward. "The children are hurt." I set my fork down. I didn't realize they were expecting to come. Tessa, who was 15 then and sitting at the far end scrolling on her phone, looked up briefly and said, "I'm not hurt." The room went quiet for one strange second. Patricia laughed too quickly. Tessa went back to her phone. My father ignored her and turned to me. "This family has changed, Lauren. You can't keep acting like you get to decide who counts." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully, because by then I had already learned that one wrong tone around my father could be used as evidence for months. "I'm not deciding who counts. Daniel and I had to keep the guest list small. We've made cuts across the board. It's not personal." Nolan gave a little shrug. "It looks personal." Andrea nodded into her salad, like she was reluctantly agreeing with a fact. My mother said, "Honestly, I can see why Thomas is upset. People talk. It reflects badly on all of us." I stared at her. "On all of you? It's my wedding." Aunt Sylvia clicked her tongue softly. "Exactly, darling. A wedding is public. These things matter." Aunt Irene added, "You don't want to start your marriage with bitterness." Patricia placed a hand over her chest and lowered her gaze, and I knew I was supposed to fill the silence by reassuring her. That was the family system. They wound the room tight and waited for me to rush in and smooth everything over. But I was tired. "So," I said, "I'm sorry, feelings are hurt, but the guest list is final." No one raised their voice. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, the atmosphere shifted into something worse, polished disapproval. My father smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. "You say that now? Let's see whether you feel the same tomorrow." I looked at him confused. "What does that mean?" He leaned back. "It means actions have consequences." That dinner ended with everyone acting as though I had spoiled the evening. Patricia remained composed. My mother looked disappointed in me. Nolan told me in the driveway that I had a real talent for making simple things ugly. I drove home with both hands gripping the wheel so hard my shoulders hurt. And when I walked into the apartment, Daniel took one look at my face and turned the stove off without asking about dinner. He came over, touched my arm gently, and said, "What happened?" I laughed once, but it came out like a crack. Apparently, I'm destroying the family because I didn't invite 4 children who barely know me to a 100-person wedding where half the chairs already cost more than my monthly car payment. Daniel exhaled slowly. "That's insane." "I know," my voice shook, "but the way they say it makes me feel like maybe I'm doing something cruel." He held my face in both hands and said, "Lauren, listen to me. A boundary doesn't become cruelty because manipulative people don't like it. I wish I could say that sentence fixed everything immediately. It didn't. Years of conditioning don't break in one night." But his words sat somewhere deep inside me, waiting. For the next several weeks, the pressure got quieter and more strategic. My father stopped calling directly and started sending messages through other people. Aunt Martha would text me photos of Patricia's children at some school event with a caption like, "They're such sweet kids. Breaks my heart how left out they feel." My mother called to warn me that older relatives were beginning to question my character. Nolan sent a message that said, "If this is about money, Dad is willing to help if pride isn't getting in the way." That one made my jaw go tight because my father was not paying for my wedding, not the venue, not the dress, not the catering, nothing. But there it was again. The family's favorite trick of creating a version of me that sounded selfish, unstable, or ungrateful, and then reacting to that fake version as if it were real. Daniel wanted me to block them for a week. I almost did. But at that point, I still believed that if I stayed calm enough, organized enough, kind enough, they would eventually remember that I was a person and not a role. Then came the bridal brunch, which in hindsight was the first truly open humiliation. It was held at a restaurant with pale blue walls, gold-framed mirrors, and little crystal vases on each table. My maid of honor, Naomi, had helped organize it with Daniel's sister, Julia. They had tried so hard to create something light and beautiful for me. There were pastries dusted with sugar, tiny sandwiches with ribbons of cucumber, tea poured into floral cups, and a long table with soft music in the background. For the first hour, I actually relaxed. Naomi teased me about my obsessive spreadsheet tabs. Julia showed me the handwritten place cards she had finished the night before. I laughed. I breathed. I felt for a little while like a bride instead of a negotiator in a family Cold War. Then my mother arrived late with Aunt Sylvia and Aunt Irene. Patricia came 10 minutes after that, dressed in cream, which was bold enough to annoy me, but subtle enough to deny if challenged. I stood up to greet them because that was how I had been raised. Politeness first, self-protection later. Patricia hugged me lightly and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." "Wedding planning," I said. My mother kissed my cheek and murmured, "Try to look happier. People notice." I pretended not to hear that. We all sat. Naomi changed the subject twice when conversation drifted toward family tension. Julia offered more tea. For a few minutes, things held. Then Aunt Sylvia picked up the printed seating board Julia had brought as a sample and said, with false innocence, "Oh, so this is final? Final?" My stomach tightened. Yes. Patricia looked down at her lap. I didn't realize it was already set. My mother sighed. Well, I suppose that answers that. Naomi immediately said. We had to lock numbers early with the venue. But my father's absence somehow sat at the table anyway, like his voice had been sent ahead. Aunt Irene tilted her head. And there truly wasn't room for 4 children? Julia answered before I could. There truly wasn't room for a lot of people. Patricia, your wedding is not a real family wedding if you can't even make room for my wife's children. So, from this moment on, don't call me your father anymore. My dad sent me that message the night before my wedding, while my mother, my brother, and 3 of my aunts sat in his new house, backing every word he said. 2 years later, when he begged me to sign one document for the future he had carefully built on my silence, he went cold all over after I sent back 4 words and walked into court with an envelope in my hand. Before I tell you what happened, I want you to imagine this for 1 second. Imagine spending months planning the happiest day of your life, only to realize the people who should have protected you were already sitting together, deciding how to punish you for choosing peace over chaos. That was the moment I learned that blood can stand in the same room as you and still feel like a crowd of strangers. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that God makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. My name is Lauren Bennett, and for most of my life, I was the daughter people described with words like dependable, calm, mature, and easy. It sounded like a compliment until you realize what those words often mean inside a difficult family. They mean you are the one expected to bend. They mean you are the one people call first when they need money, time, emotional labor, a ride to the airport, help with paperwork, a place to vent, or someone to blame gently enough that it still looks civilized from the outside. I was 30 when I got engaged to Daniel Mercer, a civil engineer with a dry sense of humor, patient eyes, and the kind of steady personality that made other people feel louder than they were. He wasn't flashy. He didn't sweep into my life with dramatic speeches. He simply kept showing up in a way that made me feel safe. When I panicked, he slowed down. When I over-explained things, he listened all the way through. When my family made me feel like I had to defend every normal boundary, he'd look at me and ask very quietly, "Do you hear how unreasonable that sounds when it's spoken out loud?" That question changed my life more than he knew. By the time Daniel proposed, I had already spent years pretending the mess inside my family was manageable. My parents, Rebecca and Thomas Bennett, had divorced when I was 26 after a long, ugly unraveling that nobody openly discussed, but everyone enjoyed, rearranging to suit whatever version made them look best. My mother, Rebecca, liked to tell people she had sacrificed everything for her children and had been betrayed in return. My father, Thomas, liked to act wounded, practical, and misunderstood, as if his decisions were never cruel, only necessary. My older brother, Nolan, had inherited the family talent for sounding reasonable while saying completely heartless things. The divorce should have changed the family structure, but somehow it only made the manipulation more sophisticated. Instead of one unstable household, I now had 2 separate headquarters for guilt. My mother still called me for money, just until Friday, and then forgot to mention it again. My brother called me dramatic whenever I pushed back. My father remarried a woman named Patricia Harlow, barely 14 months after the divorce, and suddenly I was expected to celebrate his fresh start, as though it had not come packaged with new obligations, new politics, and 4 stepchildren I had barely met. Patricia was not foolish, that was the problem. If she had been openly rude from the beginning, I would have trusted my own instincts faster. Instead, she was polished, warm in front of guests, careful with language, skilled at saying something cutting in a tone soft enough to sound generous. She had 4 children from her previous marriage: Caleb, Mason, Tessa, and Brooke. They ranged from 9 to 17 when my father married her, and I never hated them because none of this was really about them. They were children being folded into a new arrangement, and I understood that. What I did not understand was why everyone expected my wedding to become proof that I accepted a version of family that had been forced on me with almost no time, honesty, or emotional respect. It started with little things. Patricia would refer to her children as your siblings within weeks of the wedding announcement. My father would correct people if they called them Patricia's children. He'd say, "No, they're ours," with this performative pride in his voice, while ignoring the fact that he still forgot the date of my bridal fitting and once asked whether Daniel's last name was Mercer or Murray. At Sunday lunches, he would start dropping comments into the conversation like bait. "A wedding is where family comes together," or "Children remember who welcomed them and who made them feel unwanted." Patricia would lower her eyes and give a sad little smile. My mother, who should have had no personal interest in defending her ex-husband's new wife, would somehow still find a way to join in. She said things like, "Well, Lauren has always been a little rigid when things aren't exactly how she imagined." That word stayed with me. Rigid, not careful, not overwhelmed, not trying to hold together a wedding budget, a guest limit, 2 divorced parents, 1 tense venue meeting after another, and the emotional fallout of every choice. Just rigid. The truth was simpler. Daniel and I were paying for most of the wedding ourselves. His parents helped with the rehearsal dinner, and my maternal grandmother had gifted me a small amount toward the flowers before she passed away the year before. Beyond that, we were budgeting every seat, every meal, every table. We had a venue with a capacity limit. We had already cut co-workers, distant cousins, and old family friends. I invited people I had real relationships with. Patricia's 4 children were not people I knew well enough to restructure the entire seating plan around, especially since 3 of them had openly said they didn't want to attend anyway. That should have been the end of it, but in my family, practical decisions were never allowed to remain practical. They had to become moral tests. The first time I felt the room change was at a dinner in early spring, about 3 months before the wedding. My father had invited me to his house under the pretense of discussing rehearsal logistics. Daniel had a late meeting, so I went alone carrying my planner and a folder full of venue notes. The dining room looked beautiful in a way that felt almost staged. Patricia had set out white serving dishes, folded napkins, candles that smelled faintly of cedar, and polished wine glasses that caught the overhead light. It was the kind of table that said, "We are stable."